The stranger who answered the door of his mother's house handed Williams a deed of sale and an address he didn't recognize, and in that single moment, 12 years of phone calls, wire transfers, and carefully maintained distance collapsed into one unbearable question: where is she? Somewhere on a cracked red dirt road baking under a merciless afternoon sun, an elderly woman in a torn blue dress was gripping a suitcase with trembling hands while the man Williams had trusted with her life was deciding whether to leave her there and run. And Williams was already driving, already pushing that car faster than the road could handle, already too close to the truth to turn back. Friends, welcome to today's story. Before we go any further, if this opening already has your heart racing, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And we genuinely want to know. Comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Florida? London? Nigeria? Canada? Wherever you are, drop it below. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is truly reaching. Because the road Williams is about to run down, you are going to want to be there for every step of it. Let's go. The black car moved through familiar streets, and Williams sat in the back seat watching the city scroll past his window like a film he had seen a long time ago, but never quite forgotten. He had told no one. Not his assistant. Not his business partner. Not even Marcus, who had managed everything back home with such reliable cheerfulness that Williams had stopped questioning it years ago. This trip was just for his mother. Her 80th birthday. 80 years of a woman who had worked cracked hands to the bone so that her son could one day sit in a first-class seat and look down at clouds. The least he could do was show up in person. Surprise her. Hold her face in his hands and let her see, with her own eyes, that her boy had made it and that he had not forgotten where he came from. He had brought her gifts. A gold bracelet. A cashmere shawl. A framed photograph of the two of them from the last time he had been home, 12 years ago, the morning he left for the airport. He remembered how she had gripped his hand at the gate, and told him not to look back once he started walking. He had not listened. He had looked back 3 times. The car turned onto the long road that led to the estate, and Williams leaned forward in his seat. He had paid for every brick of that house. He had approved every design detail from thousands of miles away, reviewing photos Marcus sent him and wiring funds within the hour. It was supposed to be a palace for her. A reward for every sacrifice she had made. But as the car slowed at the gate, something felt wrong before Williams could name what it was. The garden was different. The bougainvillea he had specifically requested planted along the left wall was gone. The iron gate, which he had had custom-made, had been replaced with a plain wooden one. And beyond the gate, 2 small children he had never seen in his life were chasing a dog across the yard. William stepped out of the car slowly. He walked to the gate and stood there for a moment, telling himself there was a simple explanation. Perhaps Marcus had rented out a section of the property. Perhaps new staff had moved in. Perhaps he had simply misremembered the details after so many years. He knocked. A middle-aged woman answered, wiping her hands on a kitchen cloth, looking at him the way people look at someone who has appeared at the wrong address. Williams smiled carefully and introduced himself. He explained that this was his family property. That his mother lived here. That he had flown in to surprise her for her birthday. The woman's expression shifted into something he could not immediately read, not quite pity, not quite confusion, but a mixture of both. She told him she had purchased the house 5 years ago. She showed him the deed when he asked, because he had to ask, because his mind refused to accept what his ears had just heard. The signature at the bottom of the sale document was not his. But he recognized it immediately. Marcus. William stood on that front step for a long moment, the deed in his hands, the children still chasing the dog behind the woman. The whole quiet afternoon carrying on as though the ground beneath him had not just opened up. He thanked the woman. He walked back to the car. He told the driver to go. He did not call Marcus right away. He sat with it first, turning it over in his mind the way a man turns over something sharp, looking for an angle that does not cut. There had to be an explanation. A legal misunderstanding. A temporary arrangement he had not been informed of. Marcus was family. Marcus had answered every call, managed every wire transfer, sent photos of the house at Christmas. But by the time the car reached the bank, something cold had settled in Williams's chest, and it did not feel like misunderstanding anymore. The bank manager knew his name. Williams had been a significant account holder for over a decade, routing substantial funds through a local account designated for household and family expenses. The manager brought him into a private office and closed the door with the careful quietness of someone about to deliver news they did not want to deliver. What Williams saw on the statements across the next 40 minutes dismantled 12 years of certainty with the efficiency of a demolition crew. The funds had arrived faithfully, every month, exactly as he had sent them. And they had left just as faithfully, but not toward household expenses, not toward medical bills, not toward the comfortable life he had been paying for. The money had moved through a sequence of accounts he did not recognize, names he had never authorized, withdrawals that pointed in one consistent direction, toward gambling establishments, luxury hotels, and private expenditures that had nothing to do with an elderly woman's comfort. Every single month. For 12 years. Williams drove to 3 more banks that afternoon. The story was the same at each one. Different accounts. Same signature. Same trail. Same disappearing millions. He sat in the back of the car afterward and did not speak for a very long time. Outside, the city continued its ordinary business, hawkers and traffic and the smell of evening food cooking somewhere nearby, just like it always had. The world outside that window had no idea that a man inside a black car was quietly coming apart. Marcus's phone rang out the first time. And the second. By the 5th attempt, it went directly to voicemail, and Williams understood then that the calls were not being missed. They were being refused. He made a different call instead. By the following morning, a 3-man team from one of the most discreet private security firms in the country was sitting across from Williams in his hotel suite. He had used them before for corporate matters, asset recovery, fraud investigation, executive protection. They were expensive and they were fast, and right now Williams did not care about expensive. He told them what he needed. Find Marcus. Find his mother. Find out what had been happening in this house he had been paying for over the past 12 years. He spread the bank statements across the table like evidence at a trial, because that is exactly what they were. The team worked through the night. What they returned with by the next morning was a portrait of a man Williams realized he had never actually known. Marcus had not simply been skimming money. He had constructed an entire parallel life funded by his cousin's trust. A penthouse apartment in the city's most expensive district, memberships at 3 private casinos, a rotating collection of vehicles, a woman he had installed in a rented flat and introduced to friends as his wife, though he was not legally married to anyone. And then there was the rural property. A small, isolated house on the edge of a dry farming district, registered under a name Williams did not recognize but which the investigators confirmed was one of Marcus's shell identities. No neighbors visible from the road. No reason for a man of Marcus's apparent lifestyle to own a place like that. No reason that Williams could think of that did not make his blood go cold. Marcus had a source inside the bank. He always had, as a precaution, the way a man who has built a life on deception learns to maintain tripwires at every entrance. The message came through on a number he kept for exactly these moments. *, he's here. He went to the estate. He's been to the banks. *. Marcus read it twice. Then he stood up from the leather sofa in his penthouse and walked to the window and looked out at the city below with the expression of a man watching the clock run out. He had always told himself he would handle it if this day ever came. He had a plan. Several plans, actually, layered and revised over the years the way a careful man revises his contingencies. But standing there now, with his cousin physically in the country and moving fast, every plan suddenly felt thin and unconvincing. He made 2 calls. Then he drove. The rural property was 2 hours outside the city on roads that thinned gradually from asphalt to gravel to packed red earth. He arrived in the late afternoon, when the heat was still ferocious, and he went inside without knocking because it was his property, and the woman inside had stopped having choices a long time ago. She was sitting in the dim front room in the same faded blue dress she had been wearing for days. She looked up when he came in, and her eyes, still sharp, still carrying something in them that years of this had not managed to extinguish, read him immediately. She had learned to read him the way people in captivity learn to read their captors. The set of his shoulders. The speed of his walk. The way he was not quite meeting her eyes. Something had happened. He told her to get her things. He said it quickly, already moving toward the back of the house, pulling a bag from under a bed and stuffing things into it with the careless speed of a man not planning to return. She asked him where they were going. He told her it did not matter. He told her to move. She reached for the old black suitcase in the corner, the one she had arrived with, the one she had been promised she would leave with someday, the one she touched sometimes at night like a private form of prayer. Her hands trembled as she gripped the handle, her back bending under the weight of it, and under the weight of everything else besides. Marcus pulled the car around to the front. He looked at his phone again. His cousin had hired investigators. They were already pulling records. He had maybe hours. Possibly less. He opened the passenger door and told the old woman to get in. She moved slowly across the yard, the suitcase dragging in the dust behind her, and he watched her with the impatience of a man who had long ago stopped seeing her as anything other than a problem he needed to manage. He did not yet know that somewhere on the other side of the city, a black luxury sedan had just been given coordinates to a rural property registered under a name his investigators had spent all night tracing. He did not yet know that the road he was about to turn onto was the same road Williams was already driving down. He only knew he needed to move. And so he moved, taking with him the one piece of evidence that could unravel everything, the one person Williams had crossed an ocean and 12 years of silence to find. The dust rose behind the car as it pulled out onto the long, empty road, and the afternoon sun pressed down on everything without mercy. The coordinates on Williams's phone were moving. That was the detail that turned his stomach. The small blinking dot on the investigator's tracking interface was not stationary. Marcus was already running. And whatever he was running with, Williams did not need to be told. He felt it in the way a person feels something before the mind can articulate it, the way the body knows danger before the eyes confirm it. He told the driver to go faster. Then he told him to pull over and got behind the wheel himself, because there are moments when a man cannot sit in the back seat and wait for someone else to navigate his urgency. This was one of those moments. The city fell away behind him in pieces. First the high buildings, then the low ones, then the traffic, then the asphalt itself, thinning and crumbling at its edges until the road became gravel and the gravel became packed red earth, and the earth stretched out flat and wide and merciless under a sky that offered nothing but heat and light and an indifferent blue silence. He drove fast. The sedan was not built for these roads, and he did not care. The tracking dot had stopped moving about 4 kilometers ahead, just off the main dirt road, and Williams pressed the accelerator and watched the dust rise in his mirrors like a curtain closing behind him on everything that used to make sense. He saw the car first. Marcus's vehicle, pulled awkwardly to the side of the road, one door still hanging open, as though its driver had left in a hurry or an argument. Williams could not yet tell which. Then he saw the figure in the road ahead of it, and his foot lifted off the accelerator without him deciding to lift it, because his body reacted before his mind caught up. She was hunched. Small in a way she had not been 12 years ago, folded forward over a heavy black suitcase in the middle of the road, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other gripping the suitcase handle as though it were the only fixed thing in a world that had gone completely liquid around her. The blue dress she wore was torn at the hem, streaked with dust, the fabric thin and worn in a way that told its own story without a single word. Williams stopped the car. He was out of it before it fully settled, moving across the dirt at a pace that was almost a sprint but not quite, because some part of him was afraid that if he ran, something would break. Her, the moment, himself, he did not know which. He called her name. She lifted her head slowly. And when her eyes found his face, something moved through her expression that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. A recognition so deep and so desperate and so flooded with relief that it bypassed language entirely. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Her knees began to give way. He caught her before she reached the ground. He went down with her into the dust of that road, his expensive suit jacket spreading around them both, and he held her the way he had been rehearsing in his imagination for 12 years, except that in every version he had imagined, she had been standing upright and healthy in a doorway, not collapsing in his arms on a barren road in the middle of nowhere. He held her anyway. He held her, and he did not let go. The hospital was quiet by the time she was stable enough to talk. The doctors had treated her for dehydration, exhaustion, and 2 cracked ribs that the attending physician said were consistent with a fall, or with being handled roughly, and Williams had sat outside that assessment room with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded in front of his mouth, listening to the clinical language wrap itself around something that was anything but clinical. When he was finally allowed in and pulled his chair close to her bed, she looked at him for a long time without speaking. Her hands, resting on the white sheet, were smaller than he remembered. The skin over her knuckles was paper thin. Then she began to talk. She talked for a long time. Her voice was low and unsteady at first, the way a voice sounds when it has been kept quiet for too long and is relearning its own volume. But she talked. And Williams sat and listened and did not interrupt, because he understood, in some wordless way, that she had been waiting 12 years to say what she was saying to him now, and the least he could do was be completely still and receive every word of it. She told him about the first year, when Marcus had started redirecting the money gradually, carefully, in amounts small enough not to trigger suspicion. She told him about the scripts, actual handwritten pages Marcus would place in front of her before every phone call, with her lines written out and his eyes watching her face while she read them, his hand near the phone, ready to end the call if she deviated. She told him what Marcus had threatened when she refused. She told him what happened the time she had tried to resist. She told him about the house being sold. About being moved to the rural property. About the weeks when food did not come and she had learned not to complain because complaining had consequences she had stopped being willing to absorb. Williams did not cry in the room. He sat with everything she said and let it land fully, the way you stand in rain and let yourself get completely wet because running would be pointless. He held her hand the entire time. He did not look away from her face once. He cried in the corridor afterward, alone, with his back against the wall and the fluorescent lights humming above him, briefly and completely, the way a man cries when the weight of what he failed to see finally becomes a physical thing. Then he dried his face. And he made a phone call. What Williams did over the next 72 hours was not loud. It did not involve shouting or public declarations or any of the theatrical gestures that grief sometimes reaches for when it cannot find a more precise outlet. It was quiet, methodical, and absolute. He called his legal team first. Then his financial advisors. Then 3 specific individuals in the international banking sector who owed him favors significant enough that they answered on the first ring regardless of the hour. By the end of the first night, every account connected to Marcus's name, and every shell identity his investigators had unearthed, was frozen. Not flagged for review. Frozen. The kind of frozen that means a man cannot access a single cent for a cup of coffee, let alone a flight out of the country. By the second day, Williams had filed formal criminal complaints across 2 jurisdictions, provided the bank with 12 years of wire transfer documentation, and retained a prosecutor with a reputation for the kind of thoroughness that made wealthy defendants physically uncomfortable. The evidence was not circumstantial. It was overwhelming, layered, and meticulously assembled, because Williams had spent 12 years being precise about the money he sent, and that precision had created a paper trail that now pointed in one devastating direction. On the third day, Williams received a message from the airport. Marcus was at the international terminal with 2 carry-on bags and the expression of a man who has convinced himself that the situation is still manageable. He was at the check-in counter for a flight departing in 40 minutes when Williams walked through the terminal doors with 2 officers and a lawyer beside him. Marcus saw him from 30 meters away. Williams watched him see him. Watched the calculation run across his cousin's face, the brief, pathetic arithmetic of a man weighing his options and finding all of them closed. Williams walked to within a few feet of him and stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for him. He stood there in a clean suit with his hands at his sides and looked at the man he had trusted with the most important person in his life, and he said what needed to be said in a tone so level and so precise that it was more frightening than any shout could have been. He told Marcus exactly what had been frozen, what had been filed, what was already in motion, and what the next several years of his life were going to look like as a result. He itemized it the way he itemized business outcomes, clearly, without emotion, leaving no ambiguity about any figure or consequence. Then he stepped aside. The officers moved forward. Marcus said something. Williams did not listen to what it was. He watched the handcuffs close and then he turned and walked back through the terminal the way he had come in, unhurried, his footsteps steady on the polished floor, and he did not look back once. Months later, the apartment Williams had taken abroad had been reconfigured. The guest room had become something warmer and more permanent, with better light and a chair positioned near the window the way she had always preferred, close enough to watch the street below without the sun directly in her eyes. He worked from the home office most mornings now. The corporate machinery still ran, calls, decisions, contracts, the ordinary business of a life he had built, but the hours were different. The boundaries around them were different. He had become, without quite announcing it to anyone, a man who closed his laptop at a specific time each day and went to sit in the next room. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes she dozed in the afternoon light, while he read nearby. Sometimes he made tea the way she had taught him as a boy and brought it to her without being asked, and she would accept it with both hands around the cup and look at him with an expression that no amount of wire transfers had ever been able to purchase. He understood now what he had not understood before, or perhaps what he had understood but chosen not to examine too closely, that money sent across a distance is not the same thing as love delivered in person. That presence cannot be outsourced. That the most valuable thing he had ever possessed had never appeared on a financial statement. He had built his fortune by mastering the art of return on investment. It had taken him 12 years, a barren dirt road, and a woman in a torn blue dress holding a suitcase in the middle of nowhere to understand that the greatest investment he had ever neglected was the one that required nothing more than showing up. He was showing up now. Every single day, he was showing up. Asterisk, and that, friends, is where our story ends, but only the telling of it. The lessons it carries, I believe, will stay with you far longer. Asterisk. Asterisk, if this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss what we share next. And drop a comment below, tell us where in the world you are watching from. I will love to say asterisk hello to you, just to know how far this story has traveled. Because stories like this one deserve to go far.